Thank you so much for joining me on the show, Kayode. Before we get into how the sectors are doing, I'd first like to talk about how robust our capital market is and what it brings to the table in driving growth.
I mean, the capital markets has not been very strong. I mean, they had I think the height of the growth in capital markets 2006 to 2009, where they had a lot of IPOs. You had gone strong in the services sector. You had the banking consolidation. But since the fall in the stock exchange and the banking sector issues in 2008, 2009, it's been going down since then. And you see moderate pickup, but it's not where it should be.
All right, but it's good when you mentioned IPO there, because I'm looking at the possible MTN listing coming on board, and I'm looking at that company and what it will mean for the capital markets here and driving growth.
It's very important. I mean, right now, the stock market is, I think about 25% of the stock market is Dangote Cement. If MTN comes in, I think they're listing by introduction. If they come in, they're going to be another big behemoth in terms of the stock market. But also, the good thing is MTN is a very strong company. I mean, they had an analyst presentation, and you have a company that's looking at 80% dividend payout, who have very strong return on equity, $3 billion of revenues annually. It's a big company.
All right, then let's get into the non-oil story in Nigeria. Let's look at how that can also help drive growth for Nigeria.
Yeah. The thing is that Nigeria is in an interesting position because its economy is diversified in terms of, if you look at the GDP, as you mentioned, non-oil has a, but in terms of one, exports, and two, tax revenues, the non-oil sector is not pulling its weight for various different reasons. And until we get a situation where we diversify our exports revenues so that you have more than 5%, I think, because non-oil is about between 3 and 5% of export revenues at the moment, until we can increase that and also increase our tax base so that we're getting more non-oil sector revenues coming in. You're not going to see the kind of sustainable, inclusive growth that Nigeria wants.
So are you thinking of more or less getting to be more innovative around the ease of paying taxes to get more people in that net?
I think there are three main things. I think one is infrastructure, and the government is trying to address that with the railway infrastructure, roads, and what they're trying to do with the airports, try and improve logistics or move around Nigeria. I think that's very key. I think the second thing is funding, trying to get finance to key sectors. I mean, the government is concentrating on agricultural sector. The CBN just announced on cotton. They're going to for cotton growing. And you've seen an effect in the growth in the agricultural sector, which is helping the economy move from recession. But there has to be more on that. But then the third thing is what you said about is tax and bureaucracy. You have issues where there's flip-flop in policy. Policy changes all the time. You have regulatory actions, like what happened with MTN, that makes it harder for businesses. You have taxes that, if you speak to the likes of MTN, for example, they tell you they have to pay very different taxes from local government all the way to federal level. And most of these taxes, there's no coordination. Now, there's moves to try and coordinate these taxes, especially things like right-of-way for communications, but also in terms of SMEs, the number of taxes they have to pay and make sure that it actually makes sense. I think that's what a lot of work has to be done there. Okay,
let's look at some key sectors in the non-oil. Let's look at agriculture, for example. How would you rate the government's attempt over time to make that a major part of the economy?
I think since 2015, it's been a major focus of the Buhari administration, and you've seen that with CBN providing single-digit financing. The Ministry of Agriculture has been very proactive in trying to address key cash crops and trying to get funding to farmers and input help and fertilizers to try and improve agricultural output. And we've seen that. Now, the issue we have with that is that, one, is it sustainable, providing that kind of financing? We haven't seen figures about how many farmers are repaying those loans. I think two other things: insecurity. Most of the insecurity, herdsmen clashes, a lot of communal clashes, Boko Haram, they're in the food basket of Nigeria, the middle belt and northern regions of Nigeria. And to that is addressed, and farmers can actually go into their farms and be able to stay in their farms and be productive in their farms. You're not going to see the total kind of the uplift from these reforms that you want to.
All right, but still on the non-oil sector, I'm looking at a major area, which is services, and I'm looking at, how we can get more of that in the tax net or to be more reflective, in government revenues.
Yeah, I think the service sector, I think, is about 50, just slightly over 50% of GDP. It's a very key sector. And I think if you look at, you look at ICT, you look at financial, the banks, it's a very key sector. But then when you look at, we don't export our services. I think it was less than 1% of our exports are from services. I mean, the kind of banks we have, now Access Bank, which is a new merger, the biggest bank in Africa by customer, we need to export more of those services. I encourage them to do that. And until that's addressed in a way that allows companies to take advantage of that and spread across Africa. And maybe the free trade agreement that Africa is trying to get signed and Nigeria has not signed yet, maybe that will help in that process.
All right, still on that, government on services, the government has been quite innovative with trying to get value-added services in there. There have been news about things that they're planning to implement maybe later in the year. How do you see how they've gone around, improving how much the service sector is contributing to the GDP?
I think one thing they're trying to do is trying to get data on actually what's happening in the service sector, in almost sectors of the economy. And one key thing has been BVN. BVN has been instrumental in a lot of the reforms the government is trying to push. One, in trying to capture basically how cash flows are going around the economy and various kind of things, and also trying to track people and debtors and credit across the economy. Now, the issue that you have right now is that if you look at the finance sector, for example, there's a lot of crowding out of the private sector. The government is borrowing expansively, mainly due to reduced revenues because of the oil price crash in 2014, 2015. And that's crowding out the sector. And if you look at the real lending to the real sector, the banks have not really lending to the real sector anymore. Now, CBN is trying to encourage them to do that. There have been issues about trying to encourage banks to, but it hasn't really kicked off. And until that kicks off, you're not really going to see that kind of growth. All
right, then let me get into another angle, which is human capital. When you're looking at the latest figures from the UN Population Fund, they're talking about 201 million Nigerians right now. And you're looking at the strategy of, this massive population with huge potentials. Do you think we're very strategic with our human capital?
No, we're not. We have a huge population, a huge young population, but our education sector is in trouble. And we have very low productivity in Nigeria. If you look at Nigeria's productivity, in most of the manufacturing and services sector is very low compared to some of our peers. Now, to improve that productivity through education, we have to actually declare a state of war in education. We have to improve our primary and secondary education. And it's not just federal. States are in charge of primary and secondary education, and we need to improve that and try and improve the productivity of Nigerian firms and Nigerian workers. We're not going to have those kind of changes.
Still on human capital, though, I would like you to speak on, having a, well thought out diaspora strategy, because we've seen how much these remittances from diaspora, where came in last year.
Yeah. I think the government has been trying to more in. They have now this diaspora commission, which is also look into trying to bring diaspora in. I mean, people have talked about allowing the diaspora to vote, so they're more inclusive in this. But I think what I see at the moment is generally there's a bit of a brain drain. There's a lot of skilled Nigerian workers leaving the country, which happens over time. It's a periodical thing. It always happens over time.
Well, it's been quite heavy this period.
It appears to be quite heavy this period, and I think it has pluses and minuses. Pluses is potentially increasing remittances from that, but pluses is that those are the kind of brain drain we need to grow local economy, SMEs, and those are the entrepreneurs that we need to keep in the country.
All right, then. Thank you so much for your time on the show. I've been speaking to Kayode Akindele. He's a partner at TIA Capital.